Greetings, and welcome to part 2 of our look at alternative American horror of the 1970s. This is Gabe Powers, and I am joined by Bill Ackerman. In the previous episode, we covered Dream No Evil, Let's Scare Jessica to Death, Premonition, Images, and Lamora, A Child's Tale of the Supernatural. If you haven't listened to that already, please check that out first. Otherwise, stay tuned for more ramblings about a bunch of 1970s horror movies that you probably haven't seen and probably should. But you mentioned vampires and George Romero, so that's a good excuse to move on to Season of the Witch, a.k.a. Hungry Wives.
Jack's Wife is what I usually call it, but
Jack's Wife is the better title.
Yeah, that was his preferred title, but I think it came out initially as Hungry Wives, and I think it's only ever been on home video as Season of the Witch.
The Hungry Wives poster is hilarious because it's trying to sell it as a sexploitation movie, which, man, if you went into this expecting... I went into this, same video store, Casa Video had a George Romero section, so I tried to rent every George Romero movie. They didn't have There's Always Vanilla, but I remember renting this on a crappy VHS tape, which this is a very dark movie, so that was a negative, and expecting at least Martin level of violence. And being a 17 or 18-year-old and being pissed off and then not watching it again until you suggested it for this. I always knew that I just didn't get it, but it was nice to revisit it. But again, someone expecting a Dawn of the Dead or Night of the Living Dead out of this is not going to get what they want. And someone expecting an exploitation film is really not going to get what they want.
No. I remember when I rented it, it was a Thorny M.I. I remember, and it had like the masked intruder on the cover, and from George Romero, director of Dawn of the Dead or whatever. And so, you rent it thinking it's going to be, I don't know, like a slasher movie or something, or something with like a devil creature, because you don't know if that mask is meant to be fake or not. And it's a it's not that at all. It's more like a feminist drama that has these kind of occult horror kind of resonances to the story, but you could almost remove that and it would still work. I mentioned Faces and John Cassavetes earlier, and we're going to be talking about a film that takes some of the cast from that, but this actually has a scene that feels like straight up lifted from a scene in Faces, as far as like the older married woman and this kind of bohemianish kind of younger guy that she is attracted to, and like that kind of tense dance at night in a house drinking, and one of her friends is like more openly flirting with the guy, and there's like almost like a certain kind of generation gap tension, but like from the perspective of a woman that is from that pre-baby boomer generation. Like it's a different perspective than you would think that either Romero or Cassavetes would immediately identify with, but they are definitely telling the woman's perspective in those scenes, not making them about like the male fantasy of a graduate kind of situation of those moments. But yeah, it is like, a good companion to something like Let's Scare Jessica to Death as well, in that it is maybe a woman in an unhappy marriage getting involved in situations that feel like horror situations. That's really where the link, I guess, would be. But it's not really about her being driven mad. But in some ways, it almost feels like informed by things like Buñuel in terms of the dreamy imagery and like the surrealism of it. Like it feels like he's given himself freedom to include imagery that would not fit in The Crazies or Night of the Living Dead or even Martin. The other things feel like a lot more grounded. This feels like free to be fanciful with the imagery, at least the first half.
Yeah, actually, did you see, The
Amusement Park?
Yes.
Yeah, I can see that too.
It had that sort of, it's nightmare logic, but it's more like what an actual nightmare feels like, Whereas a movie like Suspiria is nightmare logic in that it eschews rationality to be frightening. But Season of the Witch and the amusement park are the sort of borderline rationality of an actual nightmare. So like actual nightmare you have is something where it feels real. It doesn't feel totally out of the ordinary, but then something just is off about it.
Yeah.
And the way this is edited, and Romero is such a good editor that I think this is like this and Martin are just like top tier editing on his part, and it's really the editing. Even though he does do some flat out, yeah, like you said, especially at the beginning, some flat out surrealism. It's really the way it's edited and story edited, not just edited in scenes, but the way the stories comes together that has this sort of nightmare logic to it.
Yeah, and it makes good use of like eerie set dressing to like convey a mood. Like it's like her house is full of like eerie lamps and things that are just, you know, creating an uncomfortable environment even when nothing overtly horrific is happening. It just always feels off kilter. And, you know, I mean, that also gives the feeling of images to some extent as well. Like the location feels threatening, but without like overt violent intrusion, you know, although it does have like these kind of nightmare stalking sequences that are pretty much where the horror comes into it and like allows people to misleadingly package it for home video.
Yeah, and they are Giallo-esque. So I'm wondering if he said in interviews back when Dawn of the Dead was being put together that he and Argento knew and respected each other's work. And I always thought he was up slightly bullshitting about knowing and respecting Argento's work, but I feel like there's some connections to the way Argento shot stuff with like Bird with the Crystal Plumage in the way that the sort of home invasion scenes are designed are similar to scenes in Bird with the Crystal Plumage.
Yeah, well, and Romero is also a Michael Powell guy, so he might have seen the color palette of something like Deep Red and like responded to it just as eye candy.
Yeah, but but this would have come out before Deep Red, so Argento would have only had but Bird with the Crystal Plumage was a really big hit, so
it was.
I could imagine.
Yeah.
But they even have black gloves. The intruder even has this crazy mask, but he also has black gloves. And it's a little bit like the home invasion scenes in Martin from the other point of view.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Sort of interesting thing about it. I should say we have acknowledged that we're cheating here by including a George Romero movie, but I feel like everything between Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, with the exception of Martin, which finally found its audience, is a sort of fair game when it comes to Romero.
Yeah, no, I think that this is one of his great films, and I think because it's not like a zombie movie or even a vampire movie, I think it tends to get overshadowed by, and he's got a lot of great films that are, deserving of their high profile, but I think that this is, the great sleeper film. And for people that love Martin a lot, I mean, this is the only other one that feels like a companion to that. To me,
yeah, Crazies feels more like a wind up for Dawn of the Dead to me.
Yeah, me too. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, and I'll agree with you as someone who claims Dawn of the Dead is his favorite movie and who defends Land of the Dead to the
I like
teeth.
That's good.
But yeah, Martin and Dawn of the Dead, and yeah, this is the Martin. This is the closest thing to Martin, because Night of the Living Dead always feels like something different from him. He never really made anything that felt the same as that. So that always felt like a group effort kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I like the films that feel like personal films. Not that we're talking about today, but I love Night Riders. And that's another one that feels like...
Yeah, it's a good point.
No one would ever think to make that movie. And this one feels like... I think, like... a lot of these horror guys, I don't know how many of them really wanted to be stuck doing that. And I think that Romero was somebody that always felt like, he probably would have appreciated having a little bit more freedom to do stories that weren't in the horror genre. And this feels like he knows he's the Night Living Dead guy, but he's not going to make There's Always Vanilla again, but he's still going to try to tell a story that is not, a straight up exploitation movie, but it could be sold that way. And it was.
Yeah, of course. And one thing that really struck me as strange about this movie is that they only had a $10,000 budget or less, but somehow they afforded a Donovan song. And Donovan would have been, I mean, were music rights just that much cheaper back
They were
then,
that
even for
much
big
cheaper.
hits?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, they were
Because
that
I like,
much...
at first I'm like, oh, is this a cover? No, it's the real Season of the Witch.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was, I don't think, I don't know at what point that became more expensive, a concern. And obviously this is well before, things like home video were even in anyone's imagination as far as like the
Right.
rights for these things. Maybe Donovan's label thought it was good promotion. I have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that they ran out of money and they didn't finish the film to the degree that it wasn't the film he set out to make. And I think that he always talked about wanting to remake it because it fell short of his original concept. And it's always a shame. I met him at a horror convention once years ago, and I told him that this was one of my favorites of his. And he, and because I think even on the Anchor Bay, was it Anchor Bay? Yeah.
Yeah, it was Anchor Bay. Yep.
Release. He expressed some regret about this film, saying it just, wasn't. They ran out of money, and it kind of didn't live up to what he was trying to do. And I think, and I said, like, I know that you're kind of down on this one, but I got to say what you did achieve really works. And he said, well, it's just that, I had something else that I was trying to do. But yeah, he appreciated that people, that there is a little fan base for this, not a big fan base, but it has its supporters.
Yeah. I met him at a convention and I was the last person in line. And the cat's found a toy. It probably got picked up. I was the last person in line, and I heard them say, and guy was in his 70s by then.
Yeah.
And I heard him ask when it was going to be lunchtime. And I looked at my watch, and it was already 3:00, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, that's dinner time to a guy in his 70s.
Yeah.
So I just didn't say anything to him. I just shook his hand and had him sign something and said thank you and left because he needed to go get his very late old man lunch.
Oh man. Good old George Romero.
Yeah. Huge hand. Jesus. Just massive hand.
Well,
that's the thing I remember.
Yeah, no, he I mean, he's probably the director that needs the least introduction on a horror podcast. But I think that if people are curious to see, the Arrow did a pretty. I mean, they had a much more ambitious box set in mind for that. Between
Night and Dawn. Yeah.
I'm on that actually, on the Crazies.
Are you on that? Oh yeah, I have that. I do have that. Yep.
I'm not credited on it, and it's actually like, I mean, I told them not to credit me because I'm barely on that track. Like Travis wanted someone to bounce things off of. He told me not to prepare anything, so I'm like, I pipe up like maybe 3 times on that thing, but I am on it.
Yeah.
But they could have had Martin, I think, but not in the U.S. And so it's such a shame that is missing like the crown jewel of that era. And they also had been talking to get the latent image shorts, including the amusement park. And something fell apart. Actually, Romero himself, before he died, stopped them from including any of his latent image commercial work. He saw it as separate from his feature filmmaking works. I don't even know how he would feel about the amusement park being available as a George Romero movie, because I think he saw that stuff sort of the same way. They were getting into sidetrack, like the same way like Bradley Metzger didn't want Henry Paris hardcore films in a retrospective on his work at Lincoln Center. And it's not because he didn't like the work; he just felt like it's a different thing. Right. And yeah, Romero amusement park. I don't know. I mean, hopefully he'd be happy that people like it, but I mean, it wasn't available for a reason.
Yeah. And I mean, we are going to finally get a Martin release.
Yes. Probably more than one.
Yeah.
But I mean,
God, that's right. They just found like an extra 3-hour long cut.
I cannot believe that has been found.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the Magnificent Ambersons of horror. I mean,
yeah. I was just talking about how like they said they found 30-minute longer cut of The Stuff, and I was like, I feel like The Stuff is a perfect length movie, but I'd like to see the deleted scenes. But then Martin's a perfect movie, but I'd also like to see this entire original intention, even if it is overlong, where
it was
certain
Romero's
movies don't
preferred.
need a whole bunch of other stuff.
It was Romero's preferred version of it. So even if I can't imagine anything being better than the film we've had, I'm curious to see what this was.
I mean, I like the can cut of Dawn of the Dead quite a bit, and I was very happy that finally got remastered because I feel like I was alone in that.
Yeah, no, I like that cut too. I mean, I think every version of that film I do enjoy. But yeah, no, I don't know. We're so lucky to. I mean, because I just never thought. I just thought that was a lost to the ages.
Yeah.
I mean, I never thought because I mean, I remember Romero talking about it on the commentary for Martin. He's just like, please, if you have it, we don't care. Like if any laws were broken, just please return it.
Right. That's crazy. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah. Anything more to say about this one, or you want to move on to the next one?
No, I think let's move on to Messiah Evil, 1973. This is another one that also had some sort of copyright issue, was on a million cheapo dollar store tapes, but it was very easy to see.
Yeah.
Not easy to see in a good version. The Code Red disc came out and looks as good as we're probably going to get. And just recently had a little boost because it was included on one of the Shudder shows. I can't remember if it was Elvira's show or
Joe Bob Briggs. No, it was
Joe Bob.
No, it was Elvira.
It was Elvira. Okay, it was one or the other. And people were talking about it online. So I was really happy because I didn't discover this one as early as I discovered Let's Scare Jessica to Death, but it was definitely one that I stumbled upon out of boredom and was very happy to discover. Its sort of claim to fame is that it was written and directed by Willard
Huyck and Gloria Katz.
Yeah, who were a married couple, partners with George Lucas on American Graffiti and Star Wars and the second Indiana Jones, and who most famously made Howard the Duck.
Yes.
This has almost nothing in common with Howard the Duck, but it isn't entirely unlike THX 1138. I suppose there's a little bit of cross-pollination there, I suppose.
Oh yeah, I guess so. I mean, they're both very studied over composition wise.
Yeah, and so this is more of a unique zombie fiction variant. They could be vampires, I suppose, but I think they're supposed to be like zombies.
I think so too, and it also is a great companion to Let's Scare Jessica to Death in a lot of ways. I mean, it even has the same kind of beginning and ending.
Yeah, it does. Although especially if you watch them while sick, you would be forgiven for confusing some of the events in the two of them.
Yeah, well, they both open with the woman kind of addressing the audience and saying, "Oh, you won't believe me if I tell you what happened," kind of essentially. And then it ends with her like on the water, traumatized by this nightmare kind of series of events that she's experienced. And I think Messiah of Evil. I'm so happy that this is getting more and more recognition as the years go by, because I think it's one of the great horror films, period. I mean, it has its flaws. I mean, it's definitely a film made by first-time filmmakers in terms of some of the performances, I guess. But,
Well, the thing I keep reading is that it was not really ever finished. Is that true?
That is true. That is true. They got it taken away from them, and then the distributors finished it without their involvement. I think even the wonderful music by it's the guy that did the Severed Arm and Phil Bishop. So Phil Bishop did the music for this, and he only did 3 scores. He died young, but like there are all these great like bizarre analog synth driven kind of scores he did. But again, like that like post Jessica, with Walter Sear, the synthesizers, like an early synthesizer kind of heavy score. But what I was going to say is the art direction by Jack Fisk and Joan Mosine. Jack Fisk, people would know as the man in the Planet in Eraserhead, and his involvement with people like Terrence Malick and David Lynch, the production design on things like Mulholland Drive. And Joan Mosine did the billboard that the father is painting in Badlands. They did all of the murals and paintings that are part of the house that
Right.
that the woman visits. And I think it's such a great location because at all times when she's in that room, there's like figures observing her from the walls.
Mm-hmm.
It's such an eerie, fun house, kind of haunted house feeling. But it also ties in what you were saying about like the counterculture at odds with towns full of old men, and this really has like the silent majority types like literally feasting on the counterculture, like in a way that kind of, I think, kind of does what Dawn of the Dead does first, as far as the consumerism zombie imagery.
Absolutely. I have a note here. That's probably the coolest scene. Is there's a Ralph's grocery store, and one of the women wanders in, and there's a bunch of zombies eating raw meat just at the counter, and they chase her down, and it's all set to music.
Yeah.
Just like Dawn of the Dead's famously set to music. And then in Tim Lucas's book, he says he sees this as a Dawn of the Dead like message about consumerism. I didn't necessarily read it that way myself, but everything about the way it's shot and the way they move in on her and she, there's even a point of view for a second of all these zombie people moving in on you, is definitely the end of Dawn of the Dead with all the bikers, a lot of the ways they're being eaten.
Yeah, I think, and the other big horror set piece is a kind of a nod to the birds, really, in a movie theater. But one thing I love about it is the influence of pop art on the look of it. I mean, this is something where you have two film student types, Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz, who are students of Antonioni and Truffaut and European art films, and they are making a horror film to kind of break into the business of filmmaking, as directors. But they have such highbrow influences that they're trying to evoke things like Red Desert, or like artists like Ed Ruscha, like the Standard Station kind of artwork, in their selection of the gas station. Like they're trying to be playful with form in a way that is not what you would expect from a low budget zombie movie.
Correct.
And it's shot in scope as well. And some of these films that we're talking about, Images was another one, and another one we'll be talking about a little bit later, which came from the sea. They make such great use of like that Panavision frame, like that wider rectangular frame. That was something that back in the VHS bootleg kind of days, this film was always so horribly cropped, even though, and it still kind of was amazing looking even in that kind of shoddy presentation. I actually didn't get to see it in widescreen until it played theatrically here. Exhumed Films is like a local group that does 35 millimeter prints of old horror movies, and they showed Messiah of Evil on a double bill with Malatesta's Carnival of Blood, the Philly-based film that I guess Stephen Thrower, put in that American Horror Project box set. But the seeing it on the big screen and widescreen was just like, oh my god, it's finally beautiful looking.
I think this is maybe the only movie I would say on this list that even the most disinterested person would agree is a horror movie. Like, like you can't watch Messiah Evil and claim it's a secret drama or secret comedy, though it is funny. Funny things happen.
Yeah.
And in fact, there are a lot of points where you wouldn't need to tweak it very much to feel like those early Brian De Palma movies or early Woody Allen movies. Some of the scenes where people are just sitting around talking to each other.
Yeah, well, Joy Bang was in a Woody Allen movie, Played Against Sam.
That's right. Yeah. So, and then guy, he reminds me of I can't remember the name of the actor.
Michael Greer.
Who's in the De Palma movies? Who is the Phantom of the Paradise guy?
Finley.
Yeah,
William Finley.
He reminds me of him. His weird giant stature and different vibe, but
yeah.
But there's one I had to make a note also. The scene actually before the Ralph's grocery store scene that feels almost like a satire of horror movies. The woman she's decided to leave this crazy house, and this woman who I feel like uninvited guests is a really common theme going through a lot of these movies.
Oh yeah.
She's decided to no longer be an uninvited guest, and she goes down and she get hitchhike from the this albino trucker.
Yeah.
He says, "Do you need a ride?" And he already looks off, and she looks in the back, and she sees all these men who we know are zombies, but to her just look like very strange men, and looks back at him and shrugs and says, "Okay." And then he eats a live rat in front of her, and she so politely excuses herself instead of screaming and jumping out of the car like you would expect someone to do, especially in a horror movie. She's just like, I'm sorry, could you just drop me off here? Uh, and so that to me felt like very intentional comedy. Like there's no mistaking. That wasn't like accidentally amusing.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. I mean, there is a lot of humor to the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just, I mean, it's full of striking sequences and images. I think I've talked about this one on Directors Club and Tracks of the Damned and Projection Booth.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'll be repeating myself if I bring up any more points, but it's a you know, it's just one I could imagine getting up to the level of Carnival of Souls level notoriety, as far as like just that kind of like so many almost poetic kind of nightmarish kind of sequences. And it does get a little bit not narratively confusing, but I mean it is a film that like has like all of this kind of talk of like the the stranger coming back to town, and like all these kind of apocalyptic kind of predictions that seem not entirely paid off, or it just feels like you're missing information. So it feels like maybe a little bit confusing the first time you watch it, but it's never not held up for me on repeat viewing.
It feels like a movie that was not finished and then edited by a third party, but in a good way for the most part.
Yeah.
And that narration and like I find that part very Lovecraft like. I guess the location feels a little Lovecrafty too. The sort of seaside where something mysterious has happened.
Yeah.
And all the people are, they're zombies. They're not fish people, but
I wonder if even the same Lovecraft influence informs Evil Dead that informs Messiah of Evil, as far as the father's recordings that they find.
Yeah. And so to me, it yeah, exactly. And so in the back of my head, I was like Evil Dead, but then also a lot about the situation reminds me of Dead and Buried, which is a movie that was always coupled with Lovecraftian adaptations, and I didn't get it until I watched it again recently. And like, oh yeah, no, it's totally a Lovecraftian kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a lot that would connect those two films as far as like the small town conspiratorial kind of feeling. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose it's all Invasion of the Body Snatchers again. It just kind of keeps going back to that for me, but that's a very influential piece of fiction, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So it's totally, not a bad thing.
Yeah. I never even thought of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but you're right. It definitely hangs over Messiah of Evil, and I hadn't thought of it.
And I can say from experience of going to art school, having art school friends in as far back as high school, and even a relatively famous artist for an uncle, that the scenes where they're talking perfectly capture the anxiety and disgust you have when people are talking about art, and all you want to do is get away and run and lose yourself out in the wiles of whatever state you're in. It just those scenes. It just struck me. The Michael Greer. His scenes, the way he talks, and the way that the women around him calling out on his bullshit. I've witnessed that exact situation so many times in my life.
He's amazing in the movie, and as somebody that was as a kid, I loved the William Castle movie, The House on Haunted Hill, and so Elisha Cook Jr. showing up playing not totally dissimilar character as far as like the wild-eyed guy that no one believes the crazy stories he's telling about the evil kind of situation, that they don't heed his warning. But I thought that was like funny casting.
Apparently Michael Greer ended his career voicing the Mayor Oscar Bologna in Cowboys of Moo Mesa.
Well, he also did Betty Davis's voice a few times because he was normally a female impersonator. He's in a lot of queer kind of uh, cult movie type
God,
things.
his voice is so deep.
Yeah, but he's in what is that movie? Like Fortune in Men's Eyes and The Gay Deceivers and another one that is on the tip of my tongue. But like he didn't normally play like butch quasi Peter Fonda type playboys, like so it's interesting casting for him as well. And Joy Bang is in a lot of different kind of cult movies. I mean, Cisco Pike is around this time, and Kayla Janice, actually, since we mentioned her earlier, did a really good article on her that you can find online.
Mariana Hill was Fredo's trophy wife in Godfather 2.
That's right, and she's I knew her from was it Redline 7000? She was in some Howard Hawks movie I have.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and that.
But you got to assume Coppola actually saw this movie, because if Lucas's friends made it, I'm sure they were all friends with each other.
That could be, or that at least got her in touch with Lucas, who knows Coppola, who
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if by this point in the 70s, Coppola has a lot going on that can't go to the theater watch Dead People, which is what they played as originally. I can't remember when Messiah of Evil became the title. Obviously, it was Messiah of Evil by the time Woody Allen shot Annie Hall.
Yeah, it's in the back. That's one of its claim to fame.
Yeah, with the House of Exorcism, was it the Bava?
Yeah, which is the shitty version of the
Lisa and the Devil.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another thing that it shares with Let's Get Jessica to Death, because that shows up in the marquee of is it Prime Cut? It was like one of those films from Michael Ritchie. I think it's Prime Cut. Let's Get Jessica to Death is on the marquee in a scene, and Messiah of Evil is got the same thing.
I didn't see that one. So
it's great. It's really weird.
Well, speaking of unique zombie movies. My next one, I hope this is also on your list next, Deathdream.
Yes.
A.K.A. Dead of Night, 1974. This is released mere months before Black Christmas, and same director, Bob Clark.
Yes.
And same writer?
No. Alan Ormsby wrote this, and what happened was they wrapped it in 73, and then Alan Ormsby and Jeff Gillen go off to make a film called Deranged, and Bob Clark went to Canada to edit Deathdream, and in the year that he spent editing it, he also edited and produced Deranged and found time to make Black Christmas. So yeah, they did come out the same year, but it's just because of the long post-production on Deathdream.
Yeah, Deranged being one of the first Ed Gein movies that acknowledged. Well, I guess they don't call him Ed Gein. Never mind.
But you're right. It is. I mean, it's they don't call him Ed Gein, but I mean they're basing it on Ed Gein.
It's not like Psycho, where it's very loosely based on something Ed Gein maybe had done at some point. It's basically just the Ed Gein story.
Yeah.
Another movie we could have covered here. Actually, I would have put on my personal list of alternative American horror from the 70s. But knowing how much everybody loves Black Christmas, which I suppose is Bob Clark's best movie, I think I actually like this more than Black Christmas.
I kind of do too. I mean, I think I go back and forth with it. I mean, Black Christmas is the more scary movie, I think.
Yeah.
And Deathdream is more melancholy. I mean, I think they're both two of the best horror movies of the 70s. So I don't, I mean, whether, if I would never try to talk anyone out of, if anyone preferred one over the other. I mean, they're both great to me, but
yeah,
this one was another one that was kind of hard for me to see because I knew it as Dead of Night in books that I had. I didn't know that Deathdream alternate title. And I don't know that it was in any of my local stores, so it actually took me a while to actually see it. But this was one where I had looked for years, and when I finally saw it, I'm like, okay, this lives up to every high expectation I ever had for it. I think it's a great film.
Yeah. So I'm guessing with the Dead of Night thing, I remember the thing I came across on the VHS days is I kept on running into the 1945 movie, Dead
Yeah.
of Night.
Well,
And I was like, these dates aren't adding up. So yeah, I didn't see it for a while
well,
either.
and to add to further confusion, Dan Curtis made a TV movie in 1977 called Dead of Night, and one of the stories, Bobby, is about a woman that kind of wishes her dead son back to life, monkey's paw
Oh,
style. So,
yeah. Well, there. Yeah. So I didn't even know that. But yeah, this, like you said, this is the monkey's paw, and I think part of the reason I like it so much because I'm a huge fan of really heavy-handed political metaphors in my horror movies. Um, Part of why I love George Romero movies, and I'm not being facetious at all. I love just hammering home. This is a horror movie, but this is really about this, and this is a movie. It might be the first major horror movie to deal with the consequences of Vietnam. I didn't research that. I just
I
am
I
guessing.
I have, and I can tell you that I mean, there's Vietnam element in I mean, it's subliminal in targets. If you look for the one shot of that he's a soldier, but I mean,
Hmm.
it's mostly about gun culture. It's not really a Vietnam psycho kind of movie. And then the original screenplay for The Last House on the Left actually had more explicit Vietnam plot element as far as the Fred Lincoln character was supposed to be a Vietnam vet in the original draft, and then that kind of, I mean, by the time it translates to screen, it's kind of, I mean, there's like a stray line about people eating, in villages with sticks that's meant to evoke Vietnam. There's like it's buried in there, but Deathdream
Yeah,
is really where, even though they never say Vietnam out loud, um, it's the first one that's really putting that political context front and center. In a way, I feel like it has a lot in common with anti-war theater of the time. Like there's a play called Sticks and Bones by David Rabe that has a lot in common with it. Um, it, I think Alan Ormsby was originally writing it as a play, and
hmm,
then when Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things had attracted some commercial success and attention, Bob Clark had investors already lined up, and so he's like, Alan, finish this. We got the money. We can make another one of these things. And so I think Alan Ormsby finished it like in 2 weeks, but he had originally been conceiving this as a stage production, and it is a more character. You could imagine a version of it that
yeah,
would play out on stage.
yeah. You'd only really need two sets, if that.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if you cut out the direct horror scenes, like of this guy, this sort of zombie kid actually killing people.
Yeah.
You could just talk about how they had happened. Yeah, so Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things was the first of these movies, and I should say that's one I've never really been able to get behind. It's I find it very sarcastic, which I think it's supposed to be. I
It
think that
is.
I'm getting it, and that it's just not to my sensibilities. But that was another reason why I didn't end up seeing this for a while, is because I thought, oh, I don't really like Bob Clark's thing. Like I never really liked Porky's and stuff like that,
Mhm.
which is what Clark is most famous for. Well, that and Baby Geniuses.
And Christmas
Um,
Story, yeah.
yeah, Christmas Story being the big thing, but I was just always afraid that maybe uh, this would be too funny, and it is 100% not funny, like at all. uh, it is maybe the bleakest movie we've talked about here. It's just it's rough. It's all about post traumatic stress and not and really about post traumatic stress on the family of a soldier. Like the soldier himself is a character who's had post traumatic stress, but like it's it's really about how him coming back kind of broken from war is just how hard it is on his family.
Yeah, and it's also to some extent also about like post-war addiction, and not
Hmm.
just him, because it's like he has come back with an addiction to blood like a vampire, but then
Hmm.
his father, when things become falling apart, it shows just how much he had turned to drink, to deal with the horrors of life, and so it's commenting on that generation's drug of choice as well. Um,
Hmm.
in some ways, it kind of points towards Martin, in that vampire as drug addict kind of metaphor. But and they both share the makeup man, because Tom Savini, this is his first credit.
Yes.
Working with Alan Ormsby. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's. I mean, I've talked about this on Directors Club. I was on the Bob Clark episode with Jim.
Okay.
But yeah, no, it's I think again, like let's get Jessica to Death and Messiah of Evil. It feels like people are finally catching up with it, and it's so deserving. I mean, I felt that way about Black Christmas for a long time, and Black Christmas, I think, is finally thought of as a proper horror classic. But it used to be just the film that I heard, well, oh, this is the film that Halloween borrows from, and I'm like, well, it's more than
exactly.
that.
Exactly. It was like, no, Halloween wasn't the first. This was the first. And then, if you're going down that route, then you're going to say, well, that wasn't the first. This was the first. It's just going to go on forever.
Yeah.
It's definitely very different from Halloween. But yeah, this is a really good movie about grief that is also it sort of doubles as a sort of Tales from the Crypt or Twilight Zone type thing. But it does have horror scenes, but it's really just about this family just not being able to deal with what's happened to their kid. And it goes beyond his death. Like, his death would have actually been easier if they wouldn't have brought him back to life with their monkey's paw wish. Him just being dead would have been easier than him being an addict and withdrawn and violent. There's a really good part where his father is a couple parts actually, where his father seems incapable of understanding his son's war experience because he keeps trying to frame it as World War II and everything about masculinity. And then his mom can't understand, like, she protects him until it's irrational because he's still her baby. The God, I'm trying to remember what the line is. There's a part where he's killing somebody and he says, "I died for you.
Why shouldn't you return the favor?"
Yeah, which is, it sounds like a cheap line, but it really has some weight to it in the context of the film, especially by the time the film ends and you really get the whole scope of what it's about.
Yeah, well, and there's a line that is in some prints of the film, not all prints of the film, where as at the end, like, Andy came home, some boys never come home. That's you can see her saying it, but the line is muted in some cuts of it. No, it's and this was the film, since we mentioned Faces. This is this reunites John Marley and Lynn Carlin, who play a married couple in that Cassavetes film. I don't know how. And what's weird is that Bob Clark and Alan Ormsby never talk about that being an influence on the casting of it. Yeah. So I don't know how that happened, but John Marley.
Now, does this?
Oh, sorry.
Does it count as a Canadian movie because of the production studio, or was?
Yes and no, because it was a Canadian British co-financing. It was Quadrant Films and Impact Films. And then but shot entirely in Florida and then edited in Canada. So it's a Canadian production, and it does show up in surveys of Canadian horror, like that book They Came From Within has it. But you could also put it alongside Florida genre films, like people like William Griffey and people like that it's like the last of the Florida chapter of Clark's genre films, because after the post-production on Deathdream, he really kind of emigrates to Canada for the next few years. And so then Black Christmas and Breaking Point and Tribute and Porky's, and he's a Canadian filmmaker, although he does come back to the States to shoot some things, like Porky's is another Florida film. But yeah, this you could call this Canadian.
Okay. I mean, I didn't want to say that. I feel like North American horror, but it was the only one I was thinking of that
it's super American. I mean, it's shot in Florida. It's dealing with Vietnam. It's not like and I think if you were trying to distribute in Canada, like, it would have felt like, I mean, it's playing on Americana imagery. I mean, I think Ozzie and Harriet was one of the influences for Ormsby's depiction of the family. Like, it's I mean, if Canada films sometimes didn't always translate well to other countries because they were so provincial in terms of their concerns. I think that they would have been a little confused if this was only distributed in Canada because it's such an American subject.
Yeah, I mean, like even Black Christmas acknowledges Toronto, or is it Toronto or Vancouver? I can't remember.
Yeah, I've been to that school where they shot that.
Yeah.
That's definitely a Canadian. I mean, and you can hear it in their accents.
Yeah.
I've been taking her out, and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But
and there's hockey is an important aspect of the story. Which, I mean, I live in Minnesota now, so I can see that maybe being an important aspect of a story in an American movie, but most of the time not.
Yeah,
most
of the time. Black Christmas is the kind of film that imports Margot Kidder and John Saxon and Keir Dullea. It's and Olivia Hussey is what, English. I mean, like it doesn't feel like a strictly Canadian production to the degree that like some of like the early Cronenberg films do.
Right.
But Deathdream, I think, I don't know, like I've always just thought of it alongside these films. I mean, in terms of like, it's not really surreal. Maybe the closest it gets to surreal is when he shows up with the black gloves and the sunglasses and looks kind of like, in one sense, it evokes The Blind Soldier from Sticks and Bones, the Vietnam play, but it also kind of points towards the look of the zombies in Shockwaves, which Alan Ormsby did the makeup for, which another Canadian zombie movie, from that 70s period, the Kane Wiederhorn movie.
And of course, Black Gloves and Giallo.
Yeah, and also Johnny and Night of the Living Dead.
Oh yeah, it's almost the same wardrobe actually.
Yeah, so I never thought, I never was sure where the costume design came from on that, but it definitely it will remind you of a lot of things, but it's also kind of an iconic looking villain. And like Targets, it ends up in a bloody, violent circumstance at the drive-in.
I suppose that Night of the Living Dead is the other Vietnam themed movie, but it's always been something that we read into Night of the Living Dead. It's never explicit about. It's just supposed to be like the whole news thing.
Yeah, there was a rather unsavory adult film, horror film, hybrid film called Forced Entry that is also a damaged Vietnam vet in New York assaulting people. That is not one I would recommend to people, but if you're looking for Vietnamese genre films, that's another example from that time. Before you get to the Paul Schrader kind of Taxi Driver, Rolling Thunder kind of stuff. But even something like Eaten Alive has the damaged vet kind of thing, but not Vietnam. But yeah, I mean, there was talk at one point of Eli Roth remaking Deathdream. I think circa the Iraq War. It never really happened, and I actually think that I've never heard them compare it, but I have always thought that the Homecoming segment of Masters of Horror from Joe Dante has a lot in common with this.
For sure, I always think of those being the two zombie war movies. Or I don't know if Homecoming counts as a movie. It's basically feature length. Not to get into the weeds on the Masters of Horror series, but that movie's a perfect case of perfect concept and just no money for execution to me.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I rewatched it recently, and I'm like, oh, it's not quite as strong as I remember it being, but it's still interesting.
Well, at the time, it was still. The war was still. I think Bush was still president.
He was. Time, so it was like it was like definitely like a shocking kind of like
super defiant thing.
Yeah, very partisan horror movie.
Yeah, and then in retrospect, it's sort of like a really cool idea but that's pretty much all of that series was a really cool idea that's just not quite pulled off.
Yeah,
and for the most part.
Yeah, no. Like, what if we get all the greatest horror directors alive and give them not a lot of money and maybe a rushed script? Let's see what they can do.
and sometimes they don't even get to write their own scripts; they're just handed somebody else's script. And
no. It's a fascinating concept behind that, but not a lot of stuff I rewatch.
No. So then, speaking of rewatch value, I'm just kidding. No, The Witch Who Came from the Sea, which I had read one thing claiming it was filmed in 1971 and not distributed to 1976, but I don't know if that's true. I did not. When I rewatched it, I didn't rewatch it with any of the I didn't watch any of the extras, so I can't remember any.
I don't remember ever hearing that, but
Yeah, it was probably just one of those IMDb things then.
But I mean, I'm not saying that it wasn't. I've never heard that, and I've been a fan of this one for a little while. But I could have just missed that.
Well, and this is one that remained in a certain cult film mind ether because it was one of the video nasties. It was actually one of the persecuted films that you prosecuted films.
It was persecuted as well.
It was persecuted as well, the poor film. Prosecuted films that was actually illegal to distribute, which means it had a really healthy bootleg history. And I don't remember ever seeing an official release of this one until the DVD. I can't remember who did the first DVD.
It was Subversive Films, I think.
Subversive Films, yeah. So, yeah, I definitely saw this one on a bootleg back in the day. And unlike the vast majority of the video nasties, I can understand why the censors were uncomfortable with this one. Even if I don't agree with them at all, I can at least see, that's what was upsetting about it. Whereas so many of the video nasties, you watch them, like I just watched Night of the Bloody Apes for review. And like, Jesus Christ, people thought this was gonna send youth onto the streets to murder people. It's like it was already outdated in 1970, whatever. But no, this is a very disturbing movie. That I made a note for myself rewatching it. I think that it's like watching an after school you're watching an after school special, but the after school special itself is slowly dying of syphilis. And then you're also on Quaaludes, so you're not sure what you're seeing is real.
It is, yeah, no, that's not inaccurate. I would say that it definitely is a film that feels like it slips into some kind of like narcotic haze at times.
Yeah.
No, well, but the script by Robert Tom is full of such unusual dialogue for this kind of story, and I think that's the things that jumped out to me the first time I saw it, because I didn't see it until the DVD, so I never saw it in pan and scan, and I'm grateful for that, because I think
this is a nice scope movie.
Yeah, this is an early credit for Dean Cundey prior to his John Carpenter Association and things that like that. But he shoots it in a widescreen aspect ratio, and so it has a great look to it. And then the music is Herschel Burke Gilbert, I think, that did the music for like It's a Wonderful Life and like a lot of 50s and 60s television. So it has like this slightly old-fashioned score to it, but then the dialogue is quite pungent and modern. Like it's kind of profane for the time, and very offbeat. And so it's kind of in that post-Repulsion, post-Jessica, neurotic woman kind of category. I mean, it's not really rape revenge, but I mean, people that like things like Miss 45 would probably. Well, I guess it is rape revenge in a sense.
It is a sort of rape revenge take on that neurotic woman.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I think of that as more like someone with a traumatic childhood past with the rape in the child. But yeah, it definitely has that kind of same feeling in Miss 45 as like a woman's war on like the jerky men in the town.
But then like Let's Scare Jessica to Death, she's not even really aware that she's like, you're never aware if she's aware. There's certain times in the movie where she's clearly covering for herself, having been, but she's also stuck in a situation covering for herself because she's basically had a what do you call it? A fugue state where she just gets somewhere without realizing how she got there, and then has to make up a story, which is something straight out of Repulsion, where and A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, where you're literally murdering people and kind of forgetting that you did.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember seeing it on the big screen at an exhumed like exploitation fest, and the audience I think was like half into it, half bummed out by like the the child trauma angle, which I think maybe I'm just like a little bit hardened to some of that stuff because it's like an exploitation movie. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, it's not real, but like, it is kind of makes it a little bit more unsavory than some of the other films we're talking about. But it's such a, I mean, you mentioned Dead and Buried, and I did think of things like that in The Fog in terms of like the beach seaside town setting, but like, it's so offbeat. I mean, right from the outset, like the dialogue is quite quirky. The characters have names like Tripoli that you don't really hear, in a lot of, and it's like she has these kind of like sexual murder fantasy kind of that the film visualizes. So like they're on the beach and like she's just like checking out men, and at first it becomes sexual, and then she's like picturing their dead bodies, and it's like, right off the bat, like we're not even like 5 minutes into the film and we're already dealing with like these kind of
and
images.
they're not just men, but they're like cartoonishly bodybuilder buff men.
They're almost like cartoon exaggerations of masculinity.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's again, like I'm a broken record, like another film that I'm so glad is getting more and more recognition and discussion. Like it's between Arrow and then I think it was on the Criterion Channel, so it's getting like some kind of highbrow presentations. I think Matt Cimber isn't really associated with horror per se, and that might be one reason why this was not really even in the same kind of degree of conversation as something like Deathdream. Because Matt Cimber comes from really more like, I think, exploitation and blaxploitation. Like I think he did things like Candy Tangerine Man. He did, and then like that Butterfly, that Piazzadora movie. Like like so he's not associated with horror movies, and so I guess this is a horror movie, but it is much a quirky character study with like violent murder scenes than it does not have like stalk and slash kind of set pieces or anything.
Right. I mean, the first kill scene is pretty upsetting because she has basically drugged two men and they think that they're going to be involved in sex, and she ties them down and kills or castrates one of them.
Yeah.
We don't see her castrate the other one, but just the way it's framed from their point of view is they're so vulnerable, which is really impressive. Vulnerability is something, men in vulnerable situations is something I think a lot of rape revenge movies try for and don't really succeed in doing.
No.
Like they like turn men into whimpering like crybabies, and that's their version of it. But these guys are like just don't know what's happening and can't stop it from happening and aren't sure if it's real because they're stoned out of their minds.
Yeah, no, it's a prolonged scene. I guess that is a really uncomfortable murder scene. I mean, you were saying earlier how you could see how this would wind up on the video nasties list, and I guess, is that the scene you're thinking of, or are you thinking of the
yeah, and that, and then the reveal that her father raped her at the very end.
Yeah,
I could see that also pushing too far, which is kind of weird because up until that point, it's a lot easier to take the pedophile stuff because the guy who plays the dad, his performance is so over the top that he's almost like a Bluto and Popeye type character.
Yeah, no, you're right.
That it makes it like it just puts it just on that comedic edge enough that I'm like, okay, I can handle this. But then when they officially establish that she was raped and like we aren't allowed to use our imaginations anymore and say, oh, he hit her or something like that, like
yeah, well, it's dealing with really disturbing ideas, but I'm trying to think in terms of the actual how it's depicted. I feel like it's still kind of a subtle movie. I mean, even the castration stuff is like all off screen and implied. I mean, like you see blood shoot up into the frame, but it's not like because I think it got an X rating, and I was trying to think like what about it would constitute an X, because but it's just, I guess, the ideas of what's happening.
I mean, it didn't help that the lead is Millie Perkins,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody thinks of her
And Frank.
as Frank, as Anne Frank. I don't think that helped it in that regard. I think that her even having topless scenes at all, but like if she would have just been in a movie where she was sexualized, that would have been one thing. But being in a movie where she's sort of a mentally ill, sexualized person who's also murdering people while topless, I think that was just like a bridge too far for a lot of people.
I guess you're right. I never thought of it like that. But yeah, I mean, it is, and again, and she is like Jessica in that she is a a woman of the counterculture in a way.
Hmm.
But like sensitive and neurotic in the way that Jessica
Yeah,
is too, like somebody that is, easily kind of rattled. Um,
there's a. It's actually very sweet scenes with her nephews, who she's really close with, um, and when she first hears about the murder, and we have to decide for ourselves if she remembers that she did it or not. But her first thought is she has to go to her nephews because they're going to be so scared when they hear someone was murdered, which is a really nice touch. I like. She's a likable character despite, and she's also not a prude. I
no,
think that helps too. I think that a lesser movie would have made her more like on a crusade to kill dirty men because she was a prude, and it's not really about that.
no, not at all. No, she's sexually very open and also kind of feminist in that like she chooses to work in a dive bar that doesn't objectify her the way that
Hmm.
like if she had worked in a more upscale place, she'd be like expected to like be more of a fantasy figure for men, and she's not
Hmm.
interested in being like a Playboy bunny.
Yeah, and I mean, her relationship with her boss is pretty, from what we see in the movie, is reasonably wholesome,
Yeah,
especially in that '70s, everybody was swinging kind of
yeah,
way.
that
But
anything goes kind of 70s.
anything goes, but we all respect each other in anything going.
Yeah, I
Uh,
love the. I mean, not all of her lines are like that politically correct, but I mean that one bitchy waitress at the bar that is her coworker, I think is hilarious.
hmm.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of. I mean, but it's just like, but it just. I think that this has some of the sharpest writing of any of the films that we're
Hmm.
talking about in terms of like these scenes feel like very awake in a way that like I mean I'm sure we both seen like a lot of like Crown International kind of exploitation films of the 70s, whatever, like they're just like functional dialogue that like is expository in nature. Like this is full of like just really strange, unusual lines.
I suppose in a certain way, this almost feels like the movie you would I mean, minus some of the more exploitative elements. This almost feels more like the movie you would expect Altman to have made, than Images.
um
Like it has a little bit the way that people talk. But maybe that was something he got into later. Maybe that's really less of the mash and more of I'm more thinking Nashville and
well,
shortcuts,
the difference would
kind of.
be, I think, that Altman tends to have dialogue that feels like they're improvising it even when they're not, because he
Yeah.
encourages so much improvisation and he films it in such a way that it kind of feels more naturalistic. This, to me, um, feels like deliberately written.
Hmm.
But I think I can imagine him doing. I can't imagine Altman doing something that violent.
No, no, yeah, the violence is definitely out of his realm for sure. Um, but yeah, there's something about like the way the characters interact with each other that feels somewhat Altman-esque to me.
Yeah,
But
well, they definitely
you're
like
right.
they definitely like hanging out and talking.
Yeah, there's a lot of hanging out and talking scenes. This would be Paul Thomas Anderson's favorite movie on this in this collection. Well, no, not anymore. I would have said back in Magnolia days, this would have been his favorite, but
Probably,
no,
yeah.
he's changed a lot. Um, yeah, the note I made for myself rewatching this was that it's less like a dream movie, and it's almost like dream adjacent. Like it's again that feeling when something's wrong and you're like in a fugue state and you're missing time. And it was reminding me of the hospital stay thing too. Like this whole movie um, feels like when you have a headache right in the center of your eyebrows,
Mm.
and it's not like so bad that you need to take a pill, but it's kind of messing up your day. Like this movie is the visual representation of that feeling somehow. It's just something about its fabric that is really disturbing on a level that doesn't like make you want to barf, and it doesn't make you want to like have an anxiety attack, or it's just like it's just picks at you
Yeah.
in a way that
Like a dull ache.
yeah, dull ache. That's perfect.
Mhm.
It's a dull ache of a film, and that's another reason why it's funny that it's a video nasty, because most of the video nasties are just total trauma dump, like gut piles, or a movie that has no reason to be on there at all.
Yeah.
Like this has nothing in common with Cannibal Holocaust, is what I'm trying to say.
No, yeah, I would agree that it's different animal than any of the Italian gore epics.
I'm sure that it just really disturbed one censor in particular, and they just said, let's put it on the list, and no one argued with them.
I mean, if you describe scenes to people of like an abuse survivor like castrating men, I mean, I
Hmm.
mean, I can imagine that doesn't sound like something you'd want to pass if you're looking to censor movies. But
Yeah, yeah.
no, and this was one that I think. Yeah, it wasn't always easy to see, and then that title also doesn't really help it because
No.
you expect it to be about a literal witch from the sea, and it is metaphorical.
Hmm.
It's evoking like Venus and such. It's not really
Hmm.
a title that
It's not,
seems to match up with the story.
and it talks about the Little Mermaid and stuff, but it's not really a Little Mermaid variant. It's just sort of this this hash of various sea tales, kind of, in like that's how she communicates with people.
Yeah, no. I think it's. I think I hesitate to say it's a lot of fun, but when I've shown it to people,
Hmm.
they have had a lot of fun with it. Like, I mean, if you can look
Hmm.
past some of the more grim story beats, it's got a lot of funny lines and it's
Hmm.
very quirky.
So then, Dark August, which is another one I had never seen, 1976. This one was also on Tubi, I assume, because Arrow has it,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think.
It's
Um,
really sad not to work on this one, but they had to get Stephen Bissett, and I don't blame them.
mm, yeah, yeah. See, I didn't. This was the second set was one I didn't get to review, and then I just didn't have the money to just buy it flat out, so I didn't end up seeing any of these extras. So
Yeah.
this to me was something you told me to watch, and I watched for the first time, uh, and just sort of this was just the way I reacted to it. I did know Martin Goldman, though, the director, because he had worked on uh, blaxploitation western that I really like.
I feel like I can't say the title of it.
No, it's the legend of a word I'm not going to say that starts with an N, Charlie.
Yeah, which I've
Um,
never seen, but I know. I mean, it's
it's
famous, but I've never seen it.
and it's starring Fred Williamson, and it was clearly inspirational to Django
Oh, I'm
Unchained.
sure. Yeah.
And Boss N Word and The Soul of N Word Charlie were kind of follow ups. Um, so I did know him from those, and it's there was a couple moments where I'm like, oh yeah, this is kind of a little westerny feel, even if it's not in its content, not westerny.
Oh, at Dark
But
August. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I can see that.
yeah. So
Yeah, well, this is another one like Premonition that's like a pet favorite of mine from this period that I feel like it's still kind of finding its audience, even
hmm.
though Arrow has helped kind of give it a presentation that does it favors as far as like, oh, it looks and sounds great. I mean, as far as a low budget film shot in Vermont from the '70s is kind of look, but I think yeah, how I describe it to people is like it's kind of like the male companion to Let's Get Jessica to Death, maybe to me. Like it
Hmm.
has that kind of like kind of haunted New Yorker, middle aged, not middle aged in this case, but I mean, but like the haunted New Yorker trying to reinvent their life in a small town and then encountering the uncanny and having to contend with it. Um,
Yeah.
and also so suffused with melancholy that it's more it's more heavy-hearted than invested in like horror thrills. Although it does have horror scenes, but it is I think the overriding feeling I walk away with is just that let's get Jessica to death. That same kind of like what do you do when you're trying to turn a corner in your life kind of feeling, and just that anxiety. And also in upstate, in New England, like that as well. But and the music also was, I forget the guy's name off the top of my head, but like it was a jazz guy, but like the music also is another big drawing point for me, because it's kind of almost points away towards things like Phantasm.
Oh yeah, I can hear that.
But it's, in terms of the plot, for people that don't know the film, it's a guy that has left his family in New York to like live with a young artist woman that he has met and started up a relationship with. But he is also haunted by a car accident where he killed a young girl by accident, and then the grandfather of that child that he's killed is looking to destroy him, and is using kind of occult practices to do this. And so he's being haunted by these visions, and so that's the premise of the movie.
I should say I did write down that William Fisher is the
okay. Yeah, William Fisher is the composer. Yep.
Yeah, because I wrote down that it's very disturbing. Like it's these time signatures that are just like made to sort of flick you in the ear at certain times. Yeah, it's very good.
Yeah, I mean, parts of it sound almost like the Libra kind of music from Shock, and other parts sound like more contemplative.
And then there's some points that are just sort of like free jazz, like yeah.
But what did you think of it? This was your first time seeing it. What were your impressions?
Yeah, I like this one probably the best of the three that I watched for the first time.
Yeah.
And to me, it had a lot of the feeling that I was watching private moments I wasn't meant to be watching. Which is definitely a sort of new Hollywood thing, I think, where it was sort of, I'm guessing it came out of like French New Wave and stuff like that, where they're trying to be like documentary-esque. It has that kind of, like, it's not documentary-esque, but it has this like you're getting in on the intimacy of this guy's life, and it's not being explicit about his situation either, in a really interesting way, where you don't know that he's left his family, except for the woman he's fighting with on the phone at one point. Finally mentioned it's his wife. I think it's like the second or third time he even argues with her. I don't think that they mention it before then. So it's the kind of movie that you're having to put together pieces, and the pieces are pretty simple on their own. It's like you just described the whole movie basically.
Yeah.
In 2 minutes, but the way it's put together, it just sort of it puts you off your game, and it puts you off your game, and it's presented in ways that again, it's not a horror movie on the level that a lot of these are horror movies. It's a horror movie in that it's about just an emotionally very trying time in this dude's life.
Yeah, and it's, you mentioned the private moments. I mean, J.J. Barrie and Caroline Barrie, the two leads that play the couple, were a real life married couple, and they get writing credit for the screenplay. So I don't know how much of their dialogue is built out of improv, but it feels like like that kind of new Hollywood post Cassavetes kind of writing for them. And like Jessica, it feels like it's populated with like East Coast stage actors. Like, it doesn't feel like a low budget teen horror movie, exploitation movie. Like, it feels like the ambitions, like Kim Hunter is in it. Like, it feels like it's aiming for a kind of classy occult kind of story.
Yeah.
Sort of the same way that Jack's wife is trying to aim for that too, but like with a little bit less frenzy.
Yeah, and like Jack's wife, the characters are are older than you would see in the straight horror movies that would come in the following 10 years or
Yeah,
whatever.
and the treatment of witchcraft is actually also comparable, because it's, in both cases, it's treated kind of respectfully and also matter of factly in terms of the rituals of it. Like they aren't
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know what I don't know. There's a lot of movies that like have like witches hang, like over a cauldron, like Wicked Witch of the West style. But like
Right.
it's dealing with witchcraft. And like, I mean, Kim Hunter plays like a benevolent witch, in a way I mean, this is pre-Satanic Panic era United States. Like, I mean, it's not like
Yeah.
trying to demonize the occult, just demonizing the bad intentions of people that could be using it. But it's fairly progressive on that front, I think.
Yeah. And it's also a case like the other movie that you can, like Season of the Witch, where you can either read it as the witchcraft is doing something or not. You can kind of read it either way depending on how you want to. It could just be the psychosis of the people that's making it feel real. But I can't recall any moment where we're definitively sure that witchcraft has caused something and not just psychosis.
Well, you know what film that I never made the connection? I feel like I turned Brian Sauer onto this film recently, and I think he might have been the one that pointed out. But there's a scene. I mean, there's elements of it that really strongly recall Night of the Demon, aka Curse of the Demon, as far as like that kind of putting a spell on somebody, but then the spell. I don't want to give away what happens, but I mean, there's things about the ending that feel kind of like reimagining the ending of that movie. Which I never made that connection, because I always was just caught up in just because I always used to try to find films that felt like Let's Scare Jessica to Death, and I just never like that felt like such like that kind of that kind of rural eeriness. There's films like The Other. There's things I thought would have it that don't quite feel that way. And then this one was something I had seen a VHS rip of it on YouTube one night, and I don't even know what compelled me to check it out, because I'd never heard of it. And it just always stuck with me. And so then when Arrow put it out, I'm like, I can't believe this is getting a Blu-ray. Because it's like, I mean, it just felt like, who would even like I mean, are horror movie fans that open-minded? They're gonna go for something that really is like a grim midlife crisis movie in some way.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these are sort of early midlife crises. When you look at them in that kind of in that kind of frame of reference.
I think so. But it's definitely a film that when you were looking for ideas for this, I'm like, well, that's one I will always want to publicly champion, because I feel like it's still, even compared to something like Messiah of Evil or Deathdream, it feels like people are still finding out about this one.
Another thing is going back again to my Body Snatchers thing about aging hippies looking for answers to their misery that require no genuine self-reflection. The heaviest metaphor in this movie is the moment when he's told to burn his studio down.
Yeah.
And he's told it will ward off a curse, and he can't, because the authorities come and put out the fire and arrest him. So he physically can't deal with his trauma because the authorities are not letting him. And it's like this. I love that kind of just hammer fist metaphor stuff.
Yeah.
It always makes my day. So I think that was the moment that I went from like a 3-star movie to a 3.5-star movie. It was just that scene alone.
Yeah, no, I mean, that character is like kind of like a rough around the edges, New Yorker. I can understand him not being an easy character to warm up to for some viewers. I just find something about it, like it feels like the kind of horror movie that like Sidney Lumet would make.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I couldn't place the entire movie who he reminded me of. He reminded me of some other character, and a more popular movie, and I just could not place it, so I gave up eventually.
Yeah, I mean, he's a character actor that you probably have seen in other things. I mean, he's in
Yes.
Spinal Tap and things, but
Yeah.
I just, I was fascinated by that movie. It was shot in Stowe, Vermont, and it's like a long drive from here, like it's like a 6-hour drive. So I've been kind of slow to visit the locations, but it's always on my to-do list. Maybe next year will be the year that I finally go and bother the locals and ask them about this movie that they would probably not know. It was shot under a title like the Haunt, and then I forget when they changed the title to Dark August, but yeah, no,
which is a really evocative title. It's a good title.
It is.
It sounds like a scary heavy metal album.
It does. It does. Yeah, I mean, I just never heard of it growing up. It's really, I mean, I think of all the films we're talking about, the one that I discovered, kind of most recently. I guess it was maybe 5 years ago. I can't remember. It was before. It was after Nightmare USA, but I didn't find it because of Nightmare USA. It was just YouTube, some channel. But yeah, no, I'm happy that people can actually check it out, whether on Tubi or on Blu-ray with commentary by Martin Goldman.
It was also crazy because I had just watched A Matter of Life and Death for the previous the podcast I recorded before this was for movies about afterlife, and Kim Hunter was young in that, and then putting together that she was Zero from Planet of the Apes, and then watching this and going, oh, there she is again. That was weird. It's just because I was a huge fan of specifically Escape from the Planet of the Apes and Conquest of the Planet of the Apes when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And she's not in the second one, but and part of me wonders if she was a big enough star that if she thought that this was going to be an Exorcist project, like if like actresses her age were looking for the next Exorcist, because what's her name got nominated?
Ellen Burstyn.
Yeah.
That's possible. I mean, I don't know how they sold it to her, but that could be. I mean, this is definitely a more flattering character than like some of the things Bette Davis was being asked to do by this point.
For sure.
I mean, I don't think it's a perfect movie. I think it kind of maybe stumbles at the finish line a little bit, but I think that there's so much to recommend it that for people that like the kind of films that we're talking about, I think it's to my mind a buried gem and probably a more satisfying film than Premonition, although I love Premonition. As far as like films that have that kind of tie to melancholy character study, but also kind of eerie. I mean, it has like a pretty great horror scene where I won't spoil it, but like a scene at night in someone's basement that becomes quite tense. I mean, it has scenes that work as horror, but the lingering feeling is more of a character study. But sometimes that's what you want. I mean, if you like something like Jack's Wife, this would be a good film along those lines. Maybe not something that is as much a horror film as Messiah of Evil, but if you're adventurous,
but I mean,
this is good.
That PG rating doesn't mess around. There's like sex and nudity and some pretty gnarly violence for a PG movie.
That's right. I forgot about that. Well, PG meant something different then.
It did. It's true. I'm actually speaking out of podcast voice right now. I think if we could do Keep My Grave Open, and I think after that my voice is going to be shot for the evening.
Sure. Yeah. I we can do one last one. You want to do that one?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, so let me ask you this. I mean, how familiar were you with the films of SF Brownrigg prior to this?
I've seen Don't Look in the Basements a couple times.
Okay.
It was yet another one that had copyright problems, so it was on a lot of cheap things. And I knew that movie well enough to, when I saw the Scorsese movie Shutter Island, go, wait, was this just like the classy version of Don't Look in the Basement?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Friday the 13th Part 5 straight up lifts the one of the scenes from the opening from it.
Yeah, it does. Yep. And I think I've seen Scum of the Earth, but I honestly can't remember.
Yeah.
So really, Don't Look in the Basement was why I'm most familiar with him.
So I think I had seen Don't Look in the Basement because I am a fanatic about The Last House on the Left, and the I think they used to maybe be paired together on double bills. And I know that the book on the making of The Last House on the Left from David Shulkin. David Shulkin is a big fan of SF Brownrigg and talks about that film in the Last House book. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I will check that out. And actually, he's been writing a book on Brownrigg for years that I think is going to be included in the Grindhouse releasing version of Scum of the Earth, aka Poor White Trash 2. And I'm not sure if it will have other SF Brownrigg films included along with it. I hope so, but I don't know.
They tend to do that, so it's possible.
I mean, they all are on many public domain releases. If you can just give me something that looks as good as The Last House on Dead End Street that's on that one Vinegar Syndrome as an extra, I don't need much. I just need them to not look like bad VHS transfers from 1982. But what I found interesting about checking out his other films, because he has 4 horror films and then 1 bad teen sex comedy, and then I don't know the whole story with SF Brownrigg. He's a Texas filmmaker. He made Don't Look in the Basement, Don't Open the Door, Scum of the Earth, and Keep My Grave Open, and then disappears from filmmaking. I don't know the whole story as to why, but they all have a Preston Sturges style repertory cast. They all the same actors appear in all the films. And they all have the same kind of weird, hot, sweaty environment in a house in Texas kind of feel.
Yeah.
Keep My Grave Open. Did I suggest that, or did you pick that from titles that I had?
You did.
Okay.
No, I'm pretty sure you suggested it, but you did give me a list of titles, and so I might have just picked one that I hadn't seen.
Yeah, I know from Letterboxd that this is not one of your favorites on the list, but what did you think of it? You can be critical of it if you want. I'm not
the thing I liked about it is it sort of felt like, especially watching it after Images, it felt like this movie came out of the universe where Images was the huge hit and not The Exorcist. And so we ended up with a whole bunch of really bottom barrel Images ripoffs instead of bottom barrel Exorcist ripoffs.
That is funny.
And I think that Images and Which Came From the Sea do a lot of the same things better.
Oh yeah,
but it's also above the total schlock that Brownrigg can kind of bring. Which part of his charm that's not necessarily a charm to a lot of these other filmmakers we're talking about is that he is sort of a hullabaloo kind of guy. He's from a slightly older generation than a lot of these people. So it's almost like, he feels like he's not that far separated from Herschel Gordon Lewis and Al Adamson's type stuff. But then he's just got a better sensibility than they.
Yeah. As someone who has seen everything that Al Adamson has made that survives, he's a more competent filmmaker.
Yes, 100%. I've probably seen 3 Adamson movies, and I can even tell you that, or Gordon Lewis for that.
Oh yeah.
He's like someone unlike Lewis who just made stuff for fun and money. He seems like he has something to say.
Yeah,
which is what makes it more interesting. This is another one I watched on YouTube. It didn't help that it was a VHS.
Yeah, you're not going to find. I have DVD of Keep My Grave Open, but it's the same. It's that same lousy alpha video transfer that you're going to find on YouTube. So it's not worth owning. Hopefully, one day they will do these correctly. It seems like a no-brainer for the Severins of the world to do a. So maybe Grindhouse Releasing will do something like that, but.
That release was announced 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So
maybe longer. I just saw. Side note: I just saw their restoration of Death Game finally, 2 weeks ago, at a screening in again Exhumed Films. They did it as part of their 24-hour horror marathon, and so that was actually a holy grail title for me because I'd never seen it in widescreen before, and so it looked gorgeous. So Grindhouse Releasing is still moving ahead with these 2 wish list kind of things. So hopefully Scum of the Earth will be something we see in 2022. But I mean, that's the most unsavory of them because it's a little rapey. I'm not. Yeah, it's not as much fun as the other ones to me because of that element. But I mean, I actually watched all of them in a row around Halloween. Prepping for this episode because I'm like, if we're talking about SF Brownrigg, I should just really fill my head with what these films are. like every review I've ever seen of them always describes them as Southern fried, which kind of makes sense for these. They do feel kind of like slightly greasy
Yeah, it's like Tobe Hooper made the elevated version of that kind of thing when he made Chainsaw Massacre. And so even though this is 1977, I don't know when it was actually shot, there's something that feels a little old fashioned about Keep My Grave Open.
Oh, totally. It feels definitely like 10 years earlier.
Mm-hmm. Which is another charming kind of bit. I guess the other note I have here is it also kind of plays like a gender swapped Psycho in a way.
I bet you that's the influence. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's instead of I feel I'm okay kind of spoiling this one. Instead of a man who takes on the personality of his dead cat, don't jump up here, don't do it. Oh jeez. A man who takes on the personality of his dead mother, it's a woman takes on the personality of her dead brother.
Yeah.
But I guess the extra twist is that he's not dead. I don't know if that's supposed to be taken literally at the end there, or if they just wanted an additional twist. But that basically, this is the last 20 minutes from the point where she picks up a prostitute and then sort of reappears as her brother.
Yeah.
That from there on, that 20 minutes of movie is really good and wild and intense, in a way that Don't Look in the Basement sometimes pulls off.
Yeah, I think Don't Look in the Basement is probably his best film, but I like the three that follow it because they just feel like, I mean, he does feel like an auteur to me. I mean, and part of it's because he has that repertory company of actors that all show up in all of them. And when you talk about the woman dressing as the brother, since we've spoiled this, I was reminded of all things Liquid Sky. When that Anne Carlisle character plays a male character, although in that it's just she's just playing two different genders, and they don't really ever comment on it. But what was that? There's something else. I'm trying to. I think of. We're gonna be spoiling all these other films. I'm going to say, you can cut this out. Girls' Night Out. I thought of that.
Okay.
That slasher movie. But no, I think that there's. I mean, I love that it's the kind of film that will have 10 minutes opening of just a drifter sneaking to a house to steal food.
Yeah, you think it's going to be a movie about him,
and then he's just the first. He's just the first victim.
And
it's also the movie debut of Stephen Tobolowsky of Ned from Groundhog Day fame.
Yeah, he is in it.
He's the male ingenue.
Yeah, I think that Brownrigg, as far as I've seen, I've only for sure seen two of them. He understands the value of a good twist.
Yeah,
and I think he gets exploitation in a way that a lot of his contemporaries don't. It's not like watching Al Adamson or what's his name? Andy
Milligan.
It's not like an Andy Milligan movie where it's an auteur from the standpoint that it's a person who is just probably completely off his rocker on drugs and probably really depressed at the time he's making it, and we're seeing his id. This is an auteur who is trying to make popular drive-in movies, I think. Yeah,
Milligan is a good point of comparison because they do feel like plays in a way that Milligan films kind of feel like plays in a house, usually his house. It is like the missing link between Milligan and Hooper, I guess. But I never thought of it that way. But because there is something kind of folksy and down home about them. but they do have that kind of sweltering sleaze element, even though they're not really explicit films. They're not, and I think that they actually get less graphic after Don't Look in the Basement. But if you can actually see most of these on YouTube in the same, subpar transfers that you'd get on a budget DVD. Now, Don't Open the Door is also on there. Yeah, I mean, they're probably an acquired taste, but I mean, if you're looking for like regional oddities, I mean, there is a coherent body of work from that guy, and just don't look into Thinking Big, the teen sex comedy he made in the '80s, which is fucking dire. But the early stuff is all of a piece in a way that I don't know. I mean, we were talking about like off the beaten path kind of horror, and this is the work of SF Brownrigg deserves greater looking into. Maybe next year we'll actually get some kind of special edition of one of his films and like some more insights. I cannot wait to read the book that David Shulkin's been writing on it.
Yeah, I think that would be a good place to end this particular discussion.
Yes, before your voice becomes the radio announcer from the John Carpenter movies. Don't close the door.
Yeah, I apologize to listeners for me starting to lose my voice, unless you think this is sexy, in which case you're welcome. So tell the people about what you've been working on. If you got what you got coming up that you're allowed to talk about. I don't know. Maybe you're not.
Yeah, I can't really talk about what I just finished, but I was working on a release of one of these movies.
Cool.
And then, other than that, I've been doing podcasts. I just interviewed Abel Ferrara for Directors Club for a bonus episode on Zeros and Ones.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, that was no pressure.
No, none at all. He's definitely known for being a very gentle, kind, easy to talk to human being. As far as well,
especially if you have 10 minutes with him and his earbuds are stopped working after the second question.
Oh, wonderful.
But yeah, no. And I just did an episode of The Projection Booth on Lost Highway that is going to be dropping soon. That has an interview with Barry Gifford on it. And that actually has an actor from Keep My Grave Open in The Lost Highway. He's the police chief, and that is from all the Brownrigg movies. But I'm trying to think of this. What else? Everything else I'm working on is unannounced.
Okay, cool. I should shock you and say I haven't seen Lost Highway since the VHS days. I should really rewatch that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a polarizing film, and David Lynch is, polarizing director, I guess. But like, I love Lost Highway, and I've saw it in 4 different theaters since opening theatrical release, and then, I think it's a good one. But yeah, I know it divides people.
My favorite David Lynch is The Elephant Man because it makes me cry.
I mean, The Elephant Man is a great film. I'm not going to knock The Elephant Man. I think Blue Velvet is the one that means the most to me, but I don't know if it's the best film. It's just the one that had the greatest impact on my life.
Yes, you have your own podcast on that, but that seems to have been on the back burner.
Yeah, I did 4 interviews with crew people from Blue Velvet, for a little mini podcast. I don't know if I'll ever resuscitate it, but yeah, if you want to hear me talk to the props guy and the guy that made the ear and the guy that played the Yellow Man, I did interviews with all of them for my From the Neighborhood podcast on the Now Playing Network.
And is there anywhere they can follow you?
Supporting characters is still my, it's been on hiatus this year, but nowplayingnetwork.net/supporting characters. You can find all my old episodes, including the ones on Kayla Denise and Stephen Thrower, since we mentioned them. And also Jim and Patrick. I have episodes with them also from Directors Club. They've both been on Genre Grinder as well.
Yep.
I think, I'm on Instagram and I'm on Twitter, but I don't use them a whole lot, so you can follow me if you want, but I don't. It's going to be boring.
Yeah. Well, as usual, you can find me on the Genre Grinder website, at Genre Grinder on Twitter, Genre Grinder Facebook, or at Gabe M as in Matthew Powers on Twitter. And I usually try to think up a cool outro here. Until next time, take the correct medications in the correct balance. No, that one doesn't really work. So what's a lesson I've learned here? Definitely don't hitch rides with albinos that eat rats and have zombies in their back of their truck. That's the lesson of the day. All right. Goodbye.
Oh, no. Must be the season of the week.